Come on, buddy, wake up.
That's my man.
You lose this again, I'm keeping it.
What happened?
You mess with time, it tends to mess back. You'll see.
The one he's been talking about, the one that he's so afraid of,
See you soon.
is Kang. Kang is bent on destruction, and I'm so curious to see what Jonathan does in the future.
I think with He Who Remains, the objective for me was to give me the largest canvas possible. And then from that, as Kang begins to rear his head and do his deeds, in so many ways, he has no choice but to be in opposition or to be different from He Who Remains.
Welcome back, everyone. You mess with time, it tends to mess back. This is my video all about how Iron Man probably knew about Kang in his variants this whole time, given a lot of new details that we've just uncovered on the Loki series and what He Who Remains said about himself and his variants across the multiverse, all the other Kangs. So we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. There's even more multiverse craziness coming up during my Marvel What If episodes in a couple weeks. And careful for spoilers from Loki if you have not been watching those episodes. A lot of what they said about the history of Kang in the Marvel Universe during the series fills in some really big gaps and WTF questions from Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War, Doctor Strange. Marvel and Kevin Feige do that all the time. They'll always use brand new Marvel projects to sort of fill in the gaps and make earlier movies seem even better in retrospect. The way they also use the Loki episodes to make Loki's journey in all the previous Marvel movies seem even more meaningful. But there's a lot of new evidence now, including some canonical tie-in book material that expands on what Iron Man was talking about when he discusses time travel in the multiverse during Avengers Endgame. There was a book that Marvel published recently called The Wakanda Files. It's actually Shuri's notes, the way that they write it, dealing with all kinds of minutia and really specific things from all the Marvel movies and characters. For instance, it actually breaks down how much Bucky Barnes earned. That's how much detail that it gets into if you're a fan of that kind of stuff. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to be referencing what it reveals about Iron Man and his time travel research during Avengers Endgame and what he learned about the multiverse during that. How it explains him knowing about the existence of the sacred timeline and Kang. So during Avengers Endgame, Iron Man is the one who discovers a safe way to travel through time using the quantum realm, Pym particles, quantum energy, building on Hank Pym's research given to him by Scott Lang. Previously in the movie, Ant-Man, the Hulk, Black Widow, Captain America had attempted time travel without Iron Man's help to hilarious consequences. So there were people time traveling before Iron Man, and even during the Loki series, we can see the TVA arresting a woman from what looks like the 1940s or 1950s. And sorry for anyone that thought that this was a Peggy Carter variant. The director of Loki did an interview recently where she debunked that theory. She said that she loved all the theories that people were coming up with during the series, but this woman was not meant to be Peggy Carter. She was just a random woman from the past that was there to show you that there were people creating Nexus events and traveling through time long before the Avengers did during Endgame. Like this is meant to be happening all across the timeline, past, present, and future. Iron Man is just one of the first people that we know about right now to figure out how to time travel reliably and safely. Travel through time, then be able to come back to the moment in time where you left from on purpose. So when he was doing his research, figuring out how to crack time travel correctly, the Wakanda Files contain a note that he wrote to the Hulk speaking about the Deutsch model of quantum mechanics, which is a real-life thing. David Deutsch's model is all about the existence of parallel universes, which is what Kang was talking about when he explained his backstory as Nathaniel Richards and how he also discovered parallel universes stacked on top of his own when he was in the 31st century. But in his note to the Hulk, Iron Man states, altering the events of the past could never affect the continuous loop, remember that term, though it could create tangential split timelines. Let's not worry about that for the time being. Earlier in the movie, when Ant-Man and the other Avengers are trying to win him over, he also mentions triggering the Deutsch proposition.
Tony, after everything you've seen, is anything really
Quantum
impossible?
fluctuation messes with the Planck scale, which then triggers the Deutsch proposition. Can we agree on that? In layman's terms, it means you're not coming home.
So when he says they might theoretically trigger the Deutsch proposition, he's saying they could create alternate branch realities, nexus events as they call them on Loki, which would lead to parallel universes rising up. But also in his note to the Hulk, when Iron Man talks about the continuous loop, he's referencing the concept of the sacred timeline, even though he doesn't call it that. He Who Remains just called it the sacred timeline is part of this whole thing with the official TVA dogma. That's what he was joking about with Loki and Sylvie when he was making those amen prayers while explaining the creation of the TVA to manage his isolated timeline. He also shows a depiction of that as a loop around itself. At the beginning of the episode, you also see the sacred timeline itself curving around the citadel at the end of time on that asteroid. That whole concept of the continuous loop is also part of what he's talking about when he speaks to Sylvie about resurrection. The timeline will start again, he'll be born Nathaniel Richards again in the 31st century, and everything will play out in a relatively similar way, and that's why he says they will also eventually wind up right back in this room.
You plunge your blade in my chest, and an infinite amount of me start another multiversal war, and I just end up right back here anyways.
Also notice during Avengers Endgame when Iron Man is cracking time travel, you see him examining this Mobius strip and you see the lines of energy arcing around it in a continuous loop. Does that not look like a representation of the sacred timeline with all the interwoven strands? If it weren't clear, when you're looking at the actual sacred timeline, those interwoven strands are meant to represent the multiverse as it existed before Loki and Sylvie messed things up, unleashing all of Kang's variants in the much larger, true version of the multiverse. The sacred timeline is kind of like a rope of time, a large rope made from many smaller pieces of rope interwoven together. It's just that He Who Remains only allowed alternate universes to exist that didn't lead to bad versions of Kang rising up. So before the Loki finale, there was a multiverse, it was just a much smaller version of the multiverse. And given Iron Man's comments to the Hulk on the dangers of alternate universes, time messing back with them, he essentially predicted what became Kang's multiverse war, even though he might not have known Kang's name. He predicted that creating a lot of these branched timelines could lead to a situation where they wind up fighting people across different universes. It's easier to understand if you think about Iron Man as a worst-case scenario kind of person. They dealt with that during Avengers Age of Ultron. Like, Ultron is the result of him going overboard because of his worst-case scenarios.
We're the Avengers. We can bust arms dealers all the live long day, but that up there, that's the end game. How are you guys planning on beating that?
But if you thought that there was only a loose connection between Kang and Iron Man before the Loki series, like everybody watches that Avengers Endgame scene and says, you know what, he's probably talking about Kang right there. Think about some of these newer Easter eggs and references from the Loki series that connect them even more. So most of Kang's technology that he used when he first started exploring alternate universes, met his first variant, was probably based on Iron Man's time travel platform technology. Nathaniel Richards actually started out as a historian in the 31st century before he became a scientist. He had a fascination with the past. Inside He Who Remains study, you can actually see artifacts that he collected from all across the entire timeline. Zoom and enhance in the background, you can even see that he's got one of Iron Man's helmets on his shelves, but you don't really spot any other artifacts from the other Avengers. This study is meant to be where he keeps his most prized possessions. Kang's TemPad here that he wears on his wrist and plays with during the episode, pre-programmed with a bunch of coordinates for space and time to move him around. Not only does the design language look almost the exact same, it functions the exact same way that Iron Man's wrist devices do. Those wrist devices that they were all wearing during Endgame were pre-programmed with all the time-space coordinates for their jumps and be able to automatically come back to the time travel platform in present day. He Who Remains just seems like he took that technology in the 31st century and refined it a little bit more. And that's also probably one of the reasons why he allowed the Avengers to have a complete free pass, traveling through time, stealing Infinity Stones, when Loki got arrested for stealing the Tesseract. According to Renslayer, He Who Remains said that the Avengers were supposed to do everything that they did. If He Who Remains is so powerful that he can change whatever he wants about Loki and Sylvie's lives, like giving Loki the Infinity Gauntlet and letting him do whatever he wants to with it, and it's no big deal, why is it so important that the Avengers perform their time heist when He Who Remains could have just gone back and defeated Thanos himself if he wanted? It's pretty clear that He Who Remains thinks of Thanos as kind of a joke in the grand cosmic scheme of things. If he's responsible for writing all the TVA dogma, there's actually a test that Loki is taking during episode 2. If you look at this computer here, it uses Thanos in this example of Avengers Endgame time travel rules about Thanos trying to steal apples from the past. It's just a funny exploration of the time travel logic from Avengers Endgame using Thanos and apples. So no coincidence that in the future, He Who Remains is sitting there eating an apple when he's talking to Loki and Sylvie. He Who Remains showing just how powerful he actually is. So why then didn't he just take care of Thanos himself? Why would he allow all that to play out? Well, the reason is probably because if the Avengers had never done their time heist, Iron Man wouldn't have invented his time travel platform, and He Who Remains would never have been able to use it in the future to explore other alternate universes. He would have never wound up becoming He Who Remains. he would never have been able to stop his variants from destroying his timeline, his universe. So that's probably the real reason the Avengers got a free pass, because he needed them to do that so that Iron Man would create this time travel platform so that he could become who he needed to become to win the multiverse war.
This stuff, it needs to happen to finish the quest.
But with the way He Who Remains talks about having paved the road for all these characters, so to speak, orchestrated the sacred timeline so that everyone is doing everything that he wants them to do and clipping the things that he doesn't want them to do, Iron Man seems like he learned about a lot of this during his time travel research, that he would have become aware of the threat of a person or variants in the future doing all these things. Now, he might not have known Kang's name or He Who Remains' name, he just probably knew that there was someone looming over all this the whole time, for all time, always, and across countless other alternate realities. And Kang being so obsessed with Iron Man enough to keep his armor in his private study with his most personal possessions makes it sound like he did have a special extra connection to him, more so than a lot of other historical figures. There's even a younger version of Kang in the comics that also sets himself up in the past as Iron Lad, inspired by Iron Man, trying to avoid his future fate as a villain, trying to be a better version of Kang, a better variant. But let me know in the comments, how much about Kang, his variants, the multiverse war, do you think that Iron Man predicted accurately? And do you think that Kang needed Iron Man to create his time travel platform so that he could crib from it in the future? This is only the beginning of the Marvel multiverse. We have Marvel What If episodes starting in a couple weeks. I will be doing all those episodes. Make sure you have alerts enabled for my channel so you don't miss any of that. I've got a lot of fun stuff planned for that. In the meantime, everyone click here to learn where the Marvel Netflix Daredevil characters are coming back in the MCU, and click here for that Loki Season 2 teaser and more Kang deleted scenes. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys tonight.